Welcome everyone to the Nontraditional Pharmacist. This is Matt Paterini, joined today by Dr. Tony Guerra. Tony is one of the co-hosts and podcaster extraordinaire for Pharmacy Podcasts. And if you're not familiar with Pharmacy Podcasts, it's actually the most popular and downloaded podcast about the pharmacy industry. They have about 50,000 plus subscribers and listeners. And it's certainly something that us at TNP here would like to emulate and build upon. So we're definitely happy to have Tony along. They do a fantastic job over there. But Tony's also had a very non-traditional path through pharmacy to this point. So we'll be interested to hear about that. And lucky to have him join us today. So welcome, Tony.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm really excited that you're kind of giving some direction to people that are really trying to get maybe out of those two primary retail hospital tracks. And certainly happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Absolutely, yeah, we certainly appreciate that. And that you hit the nail on the head with kind of the mission of TNP. But I want to start with Pharmacy Podcast because we've taken a look at it. It's similar to kind of the goal that we have in highlighting some of these pharmacists in unique roles. But can you talk a little bit about what Pharmacy Podcast is and what your role is with that production?
I think it'd be a more interesting story to tell you how I actually got on the podcast.
Yeah.
So I was a longtime listener to the podcast, and I had on the Twitter stream, it welcomed me to the podcast and said, if you have any ideas. So I typed in my Twitter ID or something like that. I had my monster. It was one of these monsters in the driveway. I was about to get in my car, and I about spit it out when I heard on the podcast, oh, we have Tony_PharmD on Twitter asking a question. And that was the first time I recognized that social media was this interactive thing rather than just kind of hearing what's going on. So I listened to the podcast, and Aaron Albert, who's very focused on career, like you guys, put out a request for 5 roads, maybe out of retail. And it wasn't as much out of retail as 5 roads that maybe were different than retail. And I was on the podcast. Todd said, hey, maybe we could reignite one that he had worked on, which was the Pharmacy Future Leaders. And that's how I ended up getting involved. And then based on kind of something that John Lee Dumas does at EO Fire, a very entrepreneurial podcast, is that he has an episode every day. So after a while, after Todd got comfortable with me being on the podcast, I asked if we could do one every week. And so we've got a lot of consistency.
Right.
So what is the podcast? It's been around for a long time. I want to say 8 or 9 years. But in the last 13 or 14 months, we've done probably 150 episodes. It's on the hashtag HIT100, top 100 right now as they're kind of tallying the votes. But it's really all Todd Urey. And it was just recently that last year maybe, that he went to this co-host thing where you got Darshan that's an attorney, and he'll tell you he's not giving advice, but he's giving good ideas.
Right.
Aaron L. Albert, who's focused on career. Blair Thielemeyer, who focuses on career to some extent, but really clinical services and things like that. GRX marketing. And so he's built it out to let us as co-hosts do what we do with our group. And mine is the Pharmacy Future Leaders. So Matt, someone like you is actually the exact kind of person we would have on Pharmacy Future Leaders, somebody recently out of school, doing something innovative, doing something not only for himself, but for the profession as a whole. And that's why I think we're getting so many downloads recently, is that the content is there. So if you want to pick 3 things that you want to have with a podcast, it has to be consistent enough that the people are going to be there every week.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have the content that's interesting to them. So we have diverse content. And then you have to have a group of people that cares enough about it to be there and maybe do things outside of their work schedule. And it sounds like you guys are doing the same thing at TNP.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. The 3 things you mentioned, and you mentioned consistency. How important is consistency? And does that mean frequently or not necessarily?
I think you can take, if you look some of the podcasts, some of the huge podcasts, when you're talking about something like NPR puts one out on Sundays. It's every Sunday. I know it's going to be there when I go run on Monday. So it's just that your audience knows when to expect it. If it's Pharmacist Fridays, you know how it is, Social Sunday and Follow Friday and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So it's just consistent, but I would say once a week is really where is a good place to be to start.
Okay. And how long have you been co-host on Pharmacy Podcast?
I want to say it's almost a year, but we almost talk in episodes.
Yes.
So I want to say I'm right around 30 or 40 episodes, which is a ton, but it just is, every student that I talk to is a new story. And it's a lot easier to create a podcast when you're talking to an individual than it is to try to come up with content yourself. So podcasts, I feel like the life of a podcast is very similar to the life of a new business. Most of them are going to die off in the first year. And then within those 5 years, it won't last. So Pharmacy Podcast has outlasted that, I think, because it has always been about talking to people, getting their ideas. So you always get something interesting.
Yeah. What's been your favorite story so far?
So favorite, I think, would be the way I met the person. So Brandon Gerleman is down in Winterset, Iowa, the Bridges of Madison County, Winterset. And he was just a guy on Twitter, maybe 400, 500 followers, was consistently tweeting. I just said, hey, would you like to be on the podcast? And I had no idea how passionate he was about the profession, how passionate he is about independent pharmacy. He hopes to be mayor of Winterset, Iowa. So it was just kind of a very cool way social media just brought it to life very early as the co-host. So I want to say it was maybe third or fourth episode in where I'm seeing, wow, I'm meeting these people that I never would have heard their story if it wasn't for things like TNP, Pharmacy Podcast, other things.
Right. So, for other people looking, for like ourselves, for example, creating something similar to Pharmacy Podcast, trying to drive the profession in different ways. You mentioned the three things that every podcast must have. What were those three things again? So
you want to have consistent content. You want to have the caring from the professionals that are working it. And then I'm blanking on the third one. That's bad. So consistent, caring. I'll have to go back. I just made that up. So it just, but I'll go back.
No, that's helpful because, along with that, what other advice would you have? There's a couple key things that you need to keep in mind when creating projects like this. But what other advice would you have for individuals looking to start maybe something similar? Maybe not exactly, podcasts or interviews, things that, TNP and Pharmacy Podcasts are doing, but something similar. What advice would you say to those folks?
Well, let's make a new C. Let's make community. I think that although I've actually never met anyone, I've only met one of the other people on the Pharmacy Podcast, we still have a good community. If you look at some of the favorite Facebook places people go, the community is set up there. And I think people are attracted to community because that's something they definitely don't have as a P4, and they definitely don't have as a pharmacist. We're all kind of on our islands. Even if we get along with the people at our own stores, maybe we know somebody from one or two others, but we really have maybe done not the best job in creating community. It's more divisive. You're a hospital pharmacist. I'm sorry, you go to this meeting, and then I'm going to be a retail pharmacist. I'm going to go to this meeting. And then I'm actually not a retail pharmacist. I'm an independent, so I'll go to this meeting. And so we've divided ourselves into these meetings instead of really having one central one. And I know APHA is huge, and I know ASHP is so huge they rent out Universal down in Orlando. So they're still big, but I don't think we're necessarily unified in a way that the millennials are unified in that they're like, why are we separate? What is that? That makes no sense to us.
Yep. No, I like that. And I just wrote all this down. So I'll go back to the three things: consistent content, caring contributor, and community collaboration. What do you think of that?
Yeah, there we go. All right. So you can have it. You can have it. So if the book comes out, the 3 C's of podcasting.
There we go.
You're welcome.
You heard it here first. Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's shift a little bit off of the podcasting and kind of the pharmacy profession projects. Let's talk about your role through pharmacy, your kind of path and history that you've taken through the profession. How did you get started, and what's the path leading to where you are now?
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what I think you mentioned in just before the interview is passion projects. And I took a very traditional route. We actually got changed from the bachelor's to the PharmD, we actually tried to get a petition together to go back to the bachelor's because we saw no value in an extra year of school, one less extra year of income. And that's, we got it, and it was good, the PharmD, you know, later in life, you know, maybe until I got this academic-ish job, it really wasn't a thing.
Okay.
I just liked chemistry. I just like being around people that like chemistry. So my path to pharmacy was pretty simple, but my path to this job wasn't. Sometime I want to say my late 20s, I was really struggling with retail in terms of the, you know, kind of repetitive use syndromes like carpal tunnel, some things with my knees and things like that. And so I got really, I guess scared is the only word that we can use. And I got a real estate license. And the first year I was terrible. I made $5,000. And so it's kind of that thing where you're like, I'm going to be a realtor. I'm going to get out and it's you know, this is going to save everything. And it didn't happen that way. But about 2 years in, I was making a pharmacist salary. And then when I left in 2007, I brought in, and I had a team of 300 with me, 253,000. So a little bit over $250,000. And it was just building contact care and community. I was coached by Brian Buffini and company out in California. It's about $5,000 a year for the coaching. But getting that contact care and community, understanding how to work. And it's not even marketing. It's understanding that this 20% of your clients represents 80% of your business, putting all your energy into it. And it took about 2 or 3 years, but I was consistently making that kind of money. And then I got married, and then I came to Iowa, and I started all over again. But my passion project had been teaching. So I started teaching for Kaplan. I made $20 an hour while I was teaching actually I taught GMAT. And then I worked in the Baltimore Middle School as a substitute science teacher. So that 8 hours, I worked 32 hours in retail, 8 hours outside with a passion project. And eventually I got a teaching job. And because I'd been faithful with my money, I could take a job that paid about half of what a pharmacist salary is. Yeah. That's how I ended up here. But I think to talk about the passion project would be the next thing that we'd want to really address.
Yeah, no, and we'd love to hear about it. So you went from kind of traditional, you know, community retail jobs into real estate, which is incredible, and you can see how some of these things happen. But it's great to hear a success story, and then now into teaching. But you know, the passion projects are, you know, is Pharmacy Podcast one of those passion projects, or?
Oh yeah.
What do you have on top of your kind of day-to-day responsibilities?
Yeah, so the pharmacy, my kids just turned 6 and 6. I've got triplet 6-year-old girls, and it's that kind of time.
Something, right?
Huh?
It's supposed to be bad luck or something, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, 16, 16, 16, I think is going to be worse luck. So. But yeah, no, and so now it's kind of a time where they're a little more grown up, and I can kind of do these things again. But the podcast just kind of, I guess I wanted to be part of a community, and I was just searching for a community, and that's why I listened to the podcast every day. I felt like Todd was talking to me, the co-hosts were talking to me. I really felt at home with the podcast, and so you know, if I were to categorize it, it's more family than it is you know, a business thing or anything like that. I don't take any money for the podcast. I don't. I just enjoy it, and it is a passion project. Yeah.
Yeah. For those people that have maybe the entrepreneurial spirit, maybe are thinking along the same lines of, you know, real estate or anything else. You know, what words of wisdom would you have for them?
I don't know. Working out of fear worked really well.
Yeah.
But I think that you want to have a passion project because it'll, I think I've heard this over and over again, and this was certainly not the way it was when I graduated 20 years ago, but to have a pharmacy job as your only job is an extremely risky investment. And that seemed very counterintuitive to hear that the first time, because the traditional was, you know, you get a medical career, then you're set. But to get a single career these days is very risky. And I'm hearing that, you know, up to 30 to 50%, I don't remember what Aaron's numbers were, but are going to be contract work. So it's very popular for people to do contract work. And so you're either on that contract train or you're hoping that your company isn't going to do this or that. And, you know, the Rite Aid merger just happened. What happens if Express Scripts has a bad turn with some things, the EpiPen thing? And so there's a lot of uncertainty in the future, and having multiple streams of income, which you'll hear in any business book. But the matter is, how do you get another stream of income within pharmacy? And for me, it was by writing. And I had no idea that you could make so much as an Audible author, but I'm making somewhere between, it depends on the month, between $4,000 and $6,000 a month with a single book.
Wow.
So if you hit they call it a pain point. If you hit a pain point, then you can really do the Zig Ziglar, help everyone else get what they want, so you can get what you want. And what I want is to be able to pay for my kids to go to college.
Right.
So 1.4 million is supposed to be how much it costs. So that's
the
good
target.
number.
And well, hey, that's a good point too. Having targets, right? I mean, I feel like you know, a lot of times people say they want to do this and that without much of an actual set target to work toward. And how do you know what to do to get to a number if you don't know it, right?
Exactly. And you're right. I think the expression is something like, if you aim for nothing, you'll be amazed at how well you hit it.
Right.
So something like that. Yeah.
Yep. Well, no, that's great. Well, hey, you know what? Thanks, Tony, for your time today. Is there anything else you want to add before we kind of wrap up here? Consistent content, caring contributor, community collaboration, the 3 C's of podcasting. Any other advice that you'd want to leave listeners with today?
Well, we'd love to have someone like you on the Pharmacy Podcast. So if you want to come on the Pharmacy Future Leaders, we'd love to have you.
Certainly appreciate that. Happy to come on anytime, and we'll be in touch about that. Be sure to connect with Tony on the Pharmacy Network and reach out to us with any questions that you may have for him. We'll be happy to connect you. Thanks again, Tony, for your time. Until next time, everyone, thanks for tuning in to TNP. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks, Matt.